Hey people, and welcome to part 2 of the special on talent. In the first part we looked at how you can develop great abilities. I also said in the first part that there are many people who say, I'm just not musical, or I don't have a knack for this or that, or I'm just not the math type or the language type, I'm just not born for this or that. And this behavior is called a mindset, and mindset is also the name of a great book by Carol Dweck. And this mindset is the fixed mindset that says you either have it or you don't. But in the first part I also said that with the right motivation and the right methods, almost everybody can learn anything. So is there really such a thing like a math type or not having a knack for something? And actually, no. If there is such a thing like innate talent, it's very basic and it's not directed at a certain cultural phenomenon like an instrument or sports or chess or something like this. People with this mentioned negative self-assessment are actually just victims of teachers or parents with a fixed mindset, with a mindset of inborn innate talent. You either have it or you don't. And they told this person at some point, you just don't have it. And I think this is really sad because these people had great potential. They were capable of great things potentially, and they were held back and their motivation was disrupted. And this does not just apply to a musical instrument, but to all fields. Just imagine how much energy was wasted because a teacher told a student that he or she just didn't have the knack for something. He or she just didn't have it, or even worse, telling girls that they're not built for math or that physics is a boys' club and she shouldn't even attempt it. So much potential talent is squandered here. Of course, at first glance it seems obvious to build on your strength to reach higher abilities. And in some cases this makes a lot of sense. But still there are many people who were held back that were potentially capable of great things, great research, reaching high abilities on an instrument or in sports, for example. Because from working on your weaknesses, there can come many great things, even greater things than working on your strength. So my goal is this. I want to correct this. I want more people with a growth mindset, with the mindset that you can always improve in anything you do. You don't have to take anything for what it is right now. You can always improve no matter what. If you have the right motivation, the right goal in mind. And that's our topic for today. We want to look at why the deep practice described in part 1 works and why you would want to undergo such a stressful and exhausting thing. So that's what we are going to talk about now. Recovery is as much a part of learning as it is of training. But why is deep practice so effective? In this context, the term honing is often used, and I like the double meaning, because on the one hand, we repeat the exercise many times by looping it, just like when we're honing an object, and on the other hand, we're grinding the ability so that at some point it becomes just exactly the way we want it to be, and because of its perfect shape stays on track automatically. What happens then is the so-called facilitation in the brain, which means that through the thicket of nerve fibers a path is built so that the movement can be retrieved faster. When repeated often, the nerve connection is isolated by a fat called myelin. As a result of this myelination, the path is now turning into a freeway as the nerve impulses run now many times faster. That's when it starts to feel effortless. The myelination cannot be reversed though. It would have to be overwritten with even more effort. That's why it's so hard to correct something you internalized the wrong way. So if in your instrument there are certain movements which are indispensable and purposeful in just one certain way, it is very important that they be repeated slow and precise until they are internalized. Why practicing slowly is not always the best thing to do, I've explained in another video. You can find the link in the description below this video. Now, one question arises. How do you keep up deep practice for a long time? It's very exhausting. You're constantly confronted with your own mistakes and shortcomings, and the reward for the effort is greatly delayed. Why would someone do this? Yes, why is exactly the key word. Those who have a strong why are willing to spend a lot of time on their personal goals. And with this, we are at the very beginning. If you read or hear interviews with successful people, sooner or later you will almost always read or hear how the person emotionally and vividly recalls an early experience that has inspired them so much that from that moment on they knew what they wanted to do for the rest of their lives. Often lofty terms such as enlightenment or revival are used, and the person has found their personal life purpose. Daniel Coyle calls this moment ignition. The ignition is the awakening experience. The moment in which the students make the spiritual connection between their present self and their future self. This requires strong emotional signals, which Daniel Coyle calls primal cues. These are mostly positive, but can also be negative. For example, orphans or people who grew up in poverty are usually very hard-working and persistent, because early on they received the strong signal, you are not safe. You have to take care of yourself. One important signal is that of future belonging. The desire of the student to belong to a certain group with high esteem or great privileges, like the footballer who after his training sees how the A selection prepares and desires to belong to this group one day. That's why it is a good idea if the rooms in our schools and also the language we speak there are full of signals of future belonging. Posters of idols, photos of bands on big stages, and constantly the subtext, this could be you. Or as Daniel Coyle writes in his other book, The Culture Code, the magic formula you have to always repeat to your students is, do you see her? 10 years ago, she was sitting right there where you are sitting now. That's a strong emotional signal. Sometimes even the teacher can be the role model. In that case, you can tell the students of your own struggle, your own experiences. Communicating one's own vulnerability and imperfection is a strong sign of trust and confidence, and thus strengthens the bond with your students. So for example, you could tell your students, I still remember that I despaired of this exercise. It took me even longer than you, and I almost wanted to quit, but I'm so glad I pulled through because this, for me, was one of the most important things I ever learned. But remember that each student responds to different signals. Find out what is important to him or her and speak their language. And remember that some students like to follow a role model, but others like to contrast it and always like to do the opposite. A strong desire and above all, a vivid vision of the future, of one day belonging to this elite circle, leads to something which Daniel Coyle calls long-term commitment. It's a kind of long-term vow to the instrument and to yourself, and it's the reason that one goes into the deep practice zone again and again to reach one's personal goal. Daniel Coyle cites a study in which students learned a new instrument, and at the beginning of their learning process they were asked of their own personal assessment of how long they will probably play their instrument. A few months, a few years, a lifetime? The answer to this question at the beginning provided the most reliable forecast about the efficiency of the students' practice time. The students with the strongest long-term commitment made more progress with the same or even less practice time than those students who had a less strong vision of the future. Incidentally, the ignition does not necessarily have to be at the beginning of the artistic development. Some have been playing their instrument for years before they have their personal awakening experience. So it's never too late to inspire, to ignite your students. Others in turn had their ignitions a long time before they found the certain instrument they want to pursue their personal goal with. So analyze your students and find out where they are. If they have had their personal ignition experience, if they have their goal, their why already or not. And if so, what it is. There is hardly anything as powerful as a strong why behind your own doing. With this, you can overcome almost any how. It is also important that a single experience as a driving force is not enough. we have to rekindle the spark again and again by creating the possibility for moving ignition experiences and by conjuring up a vision of the future and future belonging. Now we know where the motivation and the patience of successful people come from. But back to the interviews. Why do we rarely hear things like, "I still remember this one lesson with my music teacher. From that moment on, I knew." For one thing, because many of these ignition moments happen outside of class in unusual events, or because many teachers thought and still think that enthusiasm cannot be taught. Many expect that the students bring their own enthusiasm to the classroom. Of course, in the end, it has to come from the student himself or herself. But we can create the best conditions through diverse signals so that the students set their own goals and acquire enthusiasm. My teacher has given me many big and small moments of ignition by concerts he has taken me on, visions of the future, and inspirational anecdotes. So we can create an environment and develop a language which ensure that our students' hopes, dreams, and wishes form a relationship with their instrument. And if you rightly wonder if that's ethical, because this way we co-determine the future of our student, I just give you this one thought. If you don't do it, you're just as consciously deciding against it and decide that your student won't take this path. So acting is a decision for something, and not acting is a decision against something. It's still a decision. Many tips on how you can inspire people and commit them to a goal you will find in Daniel Coyle's book The Culture Code or in Start With Why by Simon Sinek. Such a teacher who treats their students with love, understanding, patience, who gives them a goal and inspires them, we will call a love coach. Hey, you're still here. Great. So now I can ask you 2 questions. Question 1. What do you think? How can you teach motivation? Do you have any idea how to excite other people? And the other question, what is your motivation for what you are doing right now? What's your goal? Please write it in the comments and I will see you in the next part.